The world of the ultra-rich is built on secrets. For tech billionaire Ethan Caldwell, his secrets were a fortress, protecting an empire built of code and ambition. But one secret wrapped in the scent of expensive perfume and the silk sheets of a penthouse suite was about to become a wrecking ball. He drove his Aston Martin through the pre-dawn mist, a titan returning to his kingdom, unaware that his queen was waiting, not with a welcome, but with a declaration of war. He thought he was coming home from a harmless night of indulgence. He was wrong. He was walking into the perfectly planned, utterly devastating end of his entire world. The Aston Martin DB11 purred into the subterranean garage, its engine a low growl that was the only sound to disturb the sterile quiet of 5 a.m. Ethan Caldwell killed the engine, the silence that followed ringing in his ears. He leaned his head back against the supple leather, the ghost of Sienna's laughter, and the sharp floral notes of her perfume still clinging to him like a second skin. It was a scent entirely different from the soft vanilla and lavender that he associated with home with his wife Olivia. Guilt was a dull, familiar ache, one he had long ago learned to compartmentalize. Business was war, and his personal life, he reasoned, was simply another complex negotiation. He was a master of managing assets, and for the last 6 months, Sienna had been an exhilarating, albeit risky, acquisition. He straightened his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit jacket, smoothing out wrinkles that weren't there. He was meticulous always. It was how he'd built his empire Caldwell Innovations from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. Meticulous in code, in contracts, and in deception. The private elevator opened directly into the sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The view, usually a source of immense pride, was a dark mirror reflecting a city that was still asleep. The apartment was silent, eerily so. Usually, even at this hour, there was the faint hum of the air filtration system or the soft padding of their golden retriever Winston coming to greet him. But tonight there was nothing, just a heavy, waiting stillness. He found Winston lying in his bed in the utility room, not even lifting his head, just a mournful thump of his tail against the cushion. Strange. Ethan walked into the master bedroom. Empty. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets crisp and untouched. A prickle of unease started to crawl up his spine. Had she gone to her mother's? An argument last week about his missed obstetrician appointment still lingered in the air between them. Olivia. 7 months pregnant with their first child, a boy had become increasingly emotional, he'd told himself. Hormones. He loosened his tie as he walked into the main living area, a vast expanse of glass steel and minimalist furniture. And that's where he saw her. Olivia was sitting in one of the stark white armchairs, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her silhouette was framed by the nascent glow of the New York City dawn. Her normally vibrant auburn hair seemed darker in the dim light, and the curve of her belly was prominent beneath a simple silk robe. She didn't turn. She just sat there, perfectly still, like a porcelain doll. "Liv," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You're up early. Everything okay?" She took a slow, deliberate breath before speaking, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was flat cold and clear as glass. "Where were you, Ethan?" The question was a scalpel, precise and sharp. He fell back on the usual script. "I'm so sorry, babe. The servers in the Tokyo office crashed. It was a complete catastrophe. I was on calls all night with the tech team. I didn't want to wake you." It was a good lie. Plausible. Detailed. He'd used variations of it before, but this time it felt flimsy, like a paper shield against a battering ram. Olivia finally turned her head, and the look in her eyes stopped his heart. The soft, loving green eyes he had fallen for were gone. In their place were shards of ice. There were no tears, no anger, just a profound, terrifying emptiness. "The servers at the Hotel Elysian, you mean?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm, in the presidential suite, with Sienna Dubois. Ethan's blood ran cold. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. His meticulously constructed world with its firewalls and compartments suddenly shattered. He could feel the blood pounding in his temples. How could she possibly know he had been so careful? Cash payments, burner phones, a suite registered under a shell corporation. He opened his mouth to deny, to deflect, to lie his way out of it, as he always did, but the look on her face told him it was useless. She knew. Not suspected. Knew. "Olivia, I can explain," he stammered, his mind racing, trying to calculate angles to formulate a strategy. "No," she said, cutting him off with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You can't. Because I already have the explanation." She gestured to the sleek marble coffee table in front of her. On it was a single thick manila envelope. "It's all in there. The explanation, in high resolution." His eyes darted to the envelope. It looked heavy, official, sinister. "What is that?" he whispered, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Olivia rose from the chair with a grace that seemed impossible for a woman so heavily pregnant. She moved with the slow, deliberate purpose of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. She picked up the envelope and walked towards him. The scent of her, that familiar, comforting vanilla, was now mixed with something steely and foreign. She stopped just a few feet from him, close enough for him to see the dark circles under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hand as she held out the envelope. "I believe this belongs to you," she said. His hand trembled slightly as he took it. It was heavy. He fumbled with the clasp, his usually nimble fingers feeling like clumsy sausages. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. The top page was not a photograph as he had dreaded. It was worse. It was a legal document. Bold black letters across the top spelled out the words he never in his wildest nightmares thought he would see. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He stared at it, the words blurring together. Irreconcilable differences. Adultery. His name. Her name. He flipped through the pages. Financial statements, asset declarations, a proposed custody agreement giving her sole physical custody of their unborn son. It was a declaration of total war meticulously prepared. Divorce. The word came out as a strangled croak. "Olivia, no. We can talk about this. We can fix this. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake." "Was it a mistake a week ago, Ethan?" she asked, her voice unwavering. "Or the week before that? Or 6 months ago when it started? How many meaningless mistakes does it take to create a pattern?" She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small, stunningly beautiful diamond engagement ring. His ring. The 5-carat cushion cut he'd had custom designed. She didn't throw it. She didn't make a scene. She simply opened his hand, the one not holding the divorce papers, and placed the ring into his palm. Her touch was cold. "Our marriage is over," she stated, not as an opinion, but as an established fact. "My lawyer Diana Reyes will be in touch with your lawyer tomorrow to arrange the details. I've already moved my things into the guest wing. I'll be staying here until the end of the week to finalize my move. For the sake of civility, I suggest you find somewhere else to be." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look back. Ethan Caldwell stood alone in the center of his multi-million-dollar penthouse, the divorce papers in one hand and the diamond ring in the other. The sun was now rising over the city, flooding the room with a brilliant, unforgiving light. The master of control had lost it completely. He had played a dangerous game, confident in his ability to manage the risk. He had just discovered in the most brutal way imaginable that he had already been checkmated. The weight of the papers in Ethan's hand felt heavier than any corporate contract he'd ever signed. His mind, usually a high-speed processor capable of juggling a dozen complex variables, was stuck in a feedback loop of a single word. How he sank onto the sofa, the crisp legal documents crinkling under his grip. He scrolled through them again, his eyes catching phrases that felt like physical blows. A documented pattern of infidelity, dissipation of marital assets, request for sole legal and physical custody. Sole custody. The thought sent a jolt of pure panic through him. His son. A boy he hadn't even met, and she was already building a wall between them. This wasn't a spontaneous emotional reaction. This was a premeditated, strategic strike. Olivia, his sweet art historian wife, the woman who organized charity galas and curated their art collection, had just executed a corporate-level takedown. The level of detail in the financial affidavits was staggering. She knew about the shell account in the Caymans. She knew about the stock options he'd vested, but hadn't declared. She knew everything. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his lawyer's name, Frank Miller. Frank was more than his lawyer. He'd been his best friend since their days at Stanford. He hit the call button. "Ethan, it's not even 6 a.m. Don't tell me you've invented a way to teleport, and you're calling me from the future." Frank's groggy voice came through the speaker. "She knows," Ethan said, his own voice sounding hollow and distant. "Frank, she knows everything. She just served me with divorce papers." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then the sound of rustling sheets. "Okay. Slow down. What do you mean she knows everything?" "Everything. Sienna, the hotel. She named her Frank. She named the goddamn hotel." Ethan stood up and began to pace the manic energy of a cornered animal taking over. "And these papers, this isn't some boilerplate document her family lawyer downloaded from the internet. This is a weapon. She lists assets I didn't even know she knew existed. It's perfect. It's terrifying." "Who's her lawyer?" Frank asked, his voice now sharp and fully awake. Ethan fumbled with the pages. "Reyes. Diana. Reyes." A low whistle came from Frank. "Oh, hell. Ethan, you're not in trouble. You're in a Category 5 hurricane." Diana Reyes was a legend in New York matrimonial law. Nicknamed the Shark in Chanel, she was known for dismantling the wealthiest, most powerful men in the city with a chilling smile and an encyclopedic knowledge of financial loopholes. She didn't just win cases, she eviscerated opponents. "How did she find out?" Ethan demanded, more to himself than to Frank. "I was so careful. Encrypted messaging apps, corporate credit cards, NDAs for the staff." His voice trailed off as he saw it. Tucked in the middle of the petition was an appendix. Appendix, evidence of infidelity. He felt his stomach lurch. With trembling fingers, he pulled out a separate, smaller envelope he hadn't noticed before sealed within the main one. He tore it open. Inside were about a dozen high-gloss photographs. The first was of him and Sienna laughing as they entered the Elysian, his arm draped possessively around her waist. The second was a telephoto shot taken from an adjacent building of them toasting champagne on the suite's private balcony. The third made him physically ill. It was of them kissing silhouetted against the window of the suite, a clear, damning image. The timestamps on the bottom of each photo were from different nights, spanning months. Tuesday, August 12th, Thursday, September 4th, Monday, October 20th, and last night. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was surveillance. Professional. He collapsed back onto the couch, the photos scattering on the floor like fallen leaves. He felt violated, exposed. The hunter had become the prey. She hired a PI. He breathed into the phone. A good one. Olivia hired a PI. Frank repeated slowly, letting the reality sink in. This wasn't a snap decision, Ethan. This has been in the works for months. While you were playing James Bond, she was planning D-Day. A door opened and closed softly down the hall. Olivia. She was moving with a quiet purpose that unnerved him. He heard the metallic click of a suitcase latch. "What do I do, Frank?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking with a desperation he hadn't felt since his company was on the verge of bankruptcy a decade ago. "You do nothing," Frank commanded. "Don't talk to her. Don't text her. Don't send her flowers. Don't try to apologize. Every word you say can and will be used against you by Reyes. We meet in my office, 10 a.m. Bring the papers. And Ethan, get out of that apartment. Now." She's established it as her territory. By staying, you look like a trespasser in your own home. Go to a hotel. Go to the office. Just go. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, then at the scattered photos of his betrayal. The woman in those pictures, Sienna, seemed like a stranger now. The thrill, the ego, boost, the escape she represented it all, curdled into a toxic sludge of regret. He heard the roll of suitcase wheels on the hardwood floor. He stood up and saw Olivia coming down the hall, pulling a large suitcase. She was dressed in simple slacks and a cashmere sweater, her face a pale, emotionless mask. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the front door. "Liv, please," he begged, taking a step towards her. "Don't do this. Think about our son. Think about our family." She stopped, her hand tightening on the suitcase handle. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, a deep, profound sorrow that was somehow more painful than rage. "I am thinking about my son, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly but not breaking. "I'm thinking about the kind of man I want him to grow up to be. A man who understands respect, a man who values honesty, a man whose promises mean something." She looked directly at him, and he felt the full weight of his failure. "I realized a long time ago," she continued, "that he couldn't learn that from you." With that, she turned and walked out the door, the soft click of it closing behind her, echoing the final deafening sound of his life imploding. He was left alone in the silent, sunlit monument to his success, a billionaire king in a kingdom of one. And he had never felt so poor, while Ethan Caldwell's world was contracting into a vortex of panic and regret. Sienna Dubois was expanding with crystalline clarity. She stood on the balcony of the Elysian penthouse, the same balcony where she'd been photographed with Ethan, but the morning light cast a different hue on her intentions. She wasn't nursing a post-tryst glow. She was reviewing the opening moves of a meticulously planned campaign. Sienna was not the vapid, money-hungry model that Olivia's private investigator file probably described her as. That was a carefully constructed persona, a mask as expertly applied as her makeup. In reality, she was a graduate of the London School of Economics, with a mind that moved like a shark through the murky waters of corporate finance. Her target had never been Ethan's heart, or even his wallet in the traditional sense. It was his company. She sipped her black coffee and scrolled through her tablet. A news alert popped up from a notorious city gossip blog, the Gotham Ledger. The headline was Explosive Tech Titan Ethan Caldwell's Marriage on the Rocks Caldwell Innovations CEO, spotted with mystery brunette. Below it was a single, grainy but clear photograph of her and Ethan entering the Elysian the night before. It wasn't one of the PI's photos. It was blurrier, clearly taken with a phone from across the street, and Sienna knew exactly who had taken it. She'd paid a paparazzo a handsome sum to be there at precisely 10:17 p.m. The article was filled with speculative venom, hinting at a troubled marriage and a C-suite executive whose focus might not be entirely on his company's upcoming Q4 earnings report. This was Phase 2. Phase 1 had been the seduction, the infiltration. Phase 2 was destabilization. Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. On the 5th call, she answered, affecting a sleepy, slightly confused tone. "Ethan, honey, what's wrong? It's so early." "She knows, Sienna. She knows everything." His voice was a panicked torrent. "She has pictures of us. She filed for divorce." Sienna injected a note of manufactured hysteria into her voice. "What? Oh my God. Pictures how I thought you said we were being careful. What are we going to do?" "I don't know," he yelled, the sound of him pacing, evident even over the phone. "My lawyer says not to talk to her. My life is falling apart." "Our life, Ethan," she corrected him softly, laying the first thread of a new web. "What does this mean for us?" It was the perfect question, designed to prey on his guilt and his savior complex. He would feel responsible for her now, too. Another problem he had to manage. I don't know," he repeated, sounding lost. "I need to handle this. My company, my son. Sienna, I need to focus on this right now. We need to lay low." "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit understanding and hurt. "I get it. I'll just be here. Don't worry about me." She hung up the demure act, dissolving instantly. Her expression hardened into one of pure, calculated focus. He wanted her to lay low. He had no idea she was the one who had just fired the first public shot. The blog post was just a primer. The real target was the Caldwell Innovations Board of Directors and its investors. The company's stock was famously stable, largely due to Ethan's reputation as a ruthlessly efficient, unshakably focused leader. A messy public divorce, especially one involving infidelity and a pregnant wife, would create a narrative of instability, of recklessness. It would spook the market. Sienna opened a secure messaging app and sent a simple message to a contact saved as Prometheus. Phase 2 initiated. Market primed. The reply came back seconds later. "Well done. The board is already nervous about the delayed launch of Project Chimera. This will amplify the pressure. Proceed with Phase 3 on schedule." Project Chimera was Caldwell Innovations' next big thing, a revolutionary augmented reality platform that was months behind schedule and billions over budget. It was Ethan's passion project, but it was also his biggest vulnerability. The board was already skeptical. All they needed was a reason to question Ethan's leadership. Sienna walked back inside the suite, her job here done. Her affair with Ethan Caldwell had been a long, often tedious investment of her time. She'd endured his monologues about stock valuations and his pedestrian taste in wine. She'd feigned interest in his life while expertly hiding every detail of her own. He saw her as a beautiful distraction, an escape. He never once thought to ask what she was escaping from. He would learn soon enough. He thought his war was with his wife. He had no idea the real enemy was the woman he had just left in his bed. Olivia Caldwell was fighting for her son and her dignity. Sienna Dubois was fighting for something else entirely, vengeance, and she was just getting started. The conference room at Frank Miller's law firm was designed to project power. Dark mahogany leather chairs, a panoramic view of the city. It was a space where fortunes were decided. But as Ethan Caldwell sat across from his friend and lawyer, he felt utterly powerless. "I've reviewed the petition," Frank said, sliding the thick document across the table. "It's a masterpiece. Diana Reyes's fingerprints are all over it. She's not just coming after your personal assets, Ethan. She's coming after the company." He tapped a clause on page 12. The morality clause, standard in most prenups, including yours. It stipulates that if the marriage ends due to a proven act of infidelity, the aggrieved party is entitled to a significantly larger settlement. But Reyes has drafted this to define marital assets in the broadest possible terms. What does that mean? Ethan asked, his voice raw. It means she's arguing that your affair constituted a distraction that has negatively impacted your leadership and therefore the potential value of Caldwell Innovations. She's going to argue that your reckless personal behavior put the company's future at risk, and Olivia is entitled to a share of that lost potential value. Ethan stared at him dumbfounded. That's insane. She can't do that. The company's value is higher than it's ever been. For now, Frank countered, his expression grim. But that gossip blog post this morning, the Gotham Ledger, that wasn't a coincidence. That was a warning shot. Reyes is building a public narrative. You, the philandering, distracted CEO. Olivia, the dignified, pregnant victim. The board will hate it. The investors will hate it. Your stock will take a hit. And when it does, Reyes will point to her petition and say, I told you so. Ethan felt a cold dread wash over him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was an existential threat to the empire he had built. Just then, Frank's assistant buzzed through on the intercom. Ms. Reyes and Mrs. Caldwell are here. Ethan's head snapped up. Here now, why? They requested a 4-way meeting. I advised against it, but Reyes was insistent, Frank said, standing to straighten his tie. Stay calm. Say nothing. Let me do the talking. Remember, anything you say is a weapon they will use. The door opened. Olivia walked in first. She looked serene and composed in a simple, elegant maternity dress. She did not look at Ethan. Her focus was entirely on the woman who followed her. Diana Reyes was exactly as her reputation described her. Tall, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, the color of blood, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. She smiled, a thin, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. Gentlemen, she said, her voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. Thank you for making the time. They sat, the four of them, around the massive table. The silence was thick with tension. We can dispense with the pleasantries. Diana began, placing a slim leather portfolio on the table. My client wishes for this process to be as swift and efficient as possible so we can all move on with our lives. To that end, we are here to present a preliminary settlement offer. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Frank. Frank read it, his eyebrows climbing his forehead. He slid it over to Ethan. Ethan looked at the numbers and felt the air rush out of his lungs. It wasn't just the monetary figure which was astronomical, it was the other terms. She wanted the penthouse. She wanted the Hamptons estate. She wanted a lump sum payment that would require him to liquidate a significant portion of his stock in Caldwell Innovations. And then there was the final brutal line item: sole custody of the minor child with Mr. Caldwell, granted supervised visitation twice a month, pending the results of a court-ordered psychological evaluation. This is a joke, Ethan spat, shoving the paper back across the table. This is extortion. Diana Reyes leaned forward, her smile never wavering. Mr. Caldwell, this is a kindness. This is our offer before we enter the discovery phase. Before we subpoena your travel records, your corporate expense reports, your emails. Before we depose every member of your executive team and the entire staff of the Hotel Elysian. Before we bring Ms. Dubois in for a deposition of her own. She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. My client has no desire to see the details of your extracurricular activities splashed across the front page of every newspaper in this city. She has no desire to see the stock of the company you built together plummet because of a protracted, ugly public battle. She is offering you a quiet, clean exit. The company we built together, Ethan scoffed. I built that company with my own 2 hands. It was Olivia who answered, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the legal posturing. Don't you dare, Ethan. Whose inheritance did we use as seed money when the first round of venture capital fell through, who hosted every single investor dinner and charmed their skeptical wives, who managed this entire household, so you could spend 100 hours a week at the office? Do not pretend for 1 second that you did this alone. Ethan stared at her, silenced. She was right. He had forgotten. In his narrative of the self-made man, he had erased her vital contributions. This offer is an insult, Frank interjected, recovering first. We will be filing a counteroffer, and the request for a psychological evaluation is baseless and offensive. Diana Reyes simply shrugged, closing her portfolio. As you wish. But let me be perfectly clear. We have a mountain of evidence. We have photographs, hotel receipts, credit card statements. We have a sworn affidavit from a former employee of yours who you fired after she rejected your advances. We are not bluffing. She stood up a signal that the meeting was over. This offer is valid for 48 hours. After that, the price goes up, and the proceedings become public. She and Olivia turned and walked out, leaving a chilling silence in their wake. Ethan stared at the empty doorway, his bravado gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. Olivia and her shark of a lawyer held all the cards, and they were about to burn his kingdom to the ground. He looked at Frank, his face pale. That affidavit she mentioned, Frank said quietly. Is it real? Ethan didn't answer. He just slowly, painfully buried his face in his hands. The 48-hour deadline ticked down like a time bomb. Ethan, exiled from his own home, was living out of a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, a sterile, impersonal space that only amplified his profound sense of dislocation. He couldn't focus. He'd tried to work to lose himself in code and quarterly reports, but the words and numbers swam before his eyes. The engine of his ambition had stalled. Frank had advised him to lay low, but the silence was deafening. He was used to being in constant motion, a flurry of meetings, calls, and decisions. Now there was just the hum of the hotel air conditioner and the relentless loop of his own mistakes playing in his head. On the second night, unable to bear the confines of the hotel room any longer, he did something impulsive. He took a car back to the penthouse. He knew Olivia was gone. She had texted him a single cold sentence. My belongings have been moved out. But he needed to be there. He needed to be in a place that felt like his. He let himself in. The apartment was just as he'd left it, but it felt hollowed out, an echo chamber of his failure. He walked through the rooms, noticing the small empty spaces where her things used to be. The antique jewelry box on her dresser, gone. The collection of first edition novels on her nightstand, gone. The faint scent of her perfume in the walk-in closet, fading. He was a ghost in his own life. He found himself drawn to the one room they had been building together, the nursery. He pushed open the door and stood on the threshold. Olivia had designed it all. The walls were painted a soft, calming shade of blue-grey, like a dawn sky. A beautiful hand-crafted wooden crib stood against one wall. A mobile of gracefully carved whales and stars hung above it, waiting for a breeze to set it in motion. On a small table next to a comfortable-looking rocking chair was a stack of children's books. Goodnight Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and on top of the stack, a small framed photograph. He picked it up. It was the sonogram, a grainy black and white image of a life he had helped create and was now in danger of losing completely. Their son. Beneath the image in Olivia's elegant script, she had written, William James Caldwell. We can't wait to meet you. William. They had chosen the name together months ago after her grandfather. He remembered the night. They were on the terrace of the Hamptons' house, wrapped in a blanket, watching a meteor shower. They had been happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. He had held his hand on her still, flat stomach, and felt a sense of profound, terrifying, wonderful purpose. A purpose beyond stock prices and market caps. Where had that man gone? When had he traded that profound feeling for the cheap, fleeting thrill of a secret life? He sank into the rocking chair, the sonogram picture clutched in his hand. The chair creaked softly, the only sound in the silent room. As he sat there, a flood of memories washed over him, not of the recent fractured past, but of the beginning. He remembered meeting Olivia at a Stanford alumni gala. He was a socially awkward, work-obsessed coder who had just secured his first round of funding. She was a brilliant art history postgrad, radiating a warmth and intelligence that both intimidated and fascinated him. He'd spilled a glass of red wine on her dress, a clumsy, mortifying accident. And she had just laughed, a genuine, beautiful laugh that made him feel instantly at ease. She saw something in him that no one else did at something beyond the awkward exterior and the relentless ambition. She saw the dreamer, the creator. She believed in him when he barely believed in himself. Her family's money, that inheritance she'd mentioned, had saved his company in its darkest hour. He had promised her he would pay it back 100 times over. He had, in dollars. But he had failed to repay it in the currencies that truly mattered: loyalty, honesty, and love. The affair with Sienna. What had it even been about? It started at a tech conference in Berlin. He was feeling insecure old. A younger, hungrier generation of tech bros was nipping at his heels. Sienna was there, a consultant for a rival firm. She was beautiful, sharp, and most importantly, she looked at him with an awe that he hadn't seen in Olivia's eyes for a long time. Olivia saw Ethan the man. Sienna saw Ethan Caldwell the icon. It was a potent, addictive drug for his ego. He had told himself it was meaningless, a game. He thought he could keep his world separate, perfectly firewalled. He thought he was smart enough to manage it all. He saw now how arrogant, how profoundly stupid he had been. He hadn't just broken his vows, he had broken the foundation of his own life. He had taken the one person who had been his true partner and made her his adversary. A single hot tear traced a path down his cheek, splashing onto the glass of the photo frame. The image of his unborn son blurred. William. He finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation over assets. This was a reckoning of his character. And by every conceivable metric, he was bankrupt. The 48-hour deadline was no longer a threat. It was a countdown to a future he had built for himself, brick by painstaking brick of his own betrayal. And he was going to lose everything that had ever given his life meaning. With the deadline just hours away, Ethan sat in Frank Miller's office, a ghost of the titan who had sat there 2 days prior. He was ready to sign, ready to give Olivia everything she wanted. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness. "Just give her the papers," Ethan said, his voice flat. "I'll sign whatever she wants." Frank leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Before you do that, there's something you need to see. I did some digging. Not on Olivia, but on your mistress." Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "It doesn't matter, Frank. This isn't about her." "I think it is." Frank said, his tone serious. He slid a file across the table. It wasn't a legal document. It was a private investigator's report. I had a guy I use for corporate due diligence run a deep background check on Sienna Dubois. I had a weird feeling about this whole thing. The leak to the press, how perfectly timed it all was. It felt professional. Ethan reluctantly opened the file. The first page was a headshot of Sienna smiling alluringly. The second page stopped his breath. It was another photo, a grainy old newspaper clipping. It showed a much younger Sienna, a teenager with braces and her hair in a ponytail, standing next to a proud-looking middle-aged man with kind eyes. The headline read, "Petrov Innovations secures major tech partnership." The man was Andrei Petrov. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Andrei Petrov, a brilliant software engineer, one of his earliest partners a decade and a half ago. They had been on the verge of a breakthrough with a new data compression algorithm, but a larger competitor had made Ethan a lucrative offer to buy him out, absorb the technology and give him a senior VP position. The catch. The offer was for him alone. They didn't want his partner. Ethan Young, ambitious and hungry, had taken the deal. He'd used a legal loophole in their partnership agreement to force Andrei out, leaving him with next to nothing. Andrei had fought it, but he didn't have the resources. He was ruined. A few years later, Frank had mentioned hearing that Andrei had passed away from a sudden heart attack, broke and broken-hearted. Ethan had felt a pang of guilt, then buried it deep under a mountain of success. "Sienna Dubois isn't her real name," Frank said softly, watching Ethan's face lose all color. "Her name is Katerina Petrov. She's Andrei's daughter." Ethan stared at the picture, his mind reeling, desperately trying to connect the dots. The charming, seductive woman from the hotel, the innocent-looking girl in the photo. They were the same person. "She legally changed her name 5 years ago," Frank continued, flipping a page. "Moved to London, got a degree in economics. She's been working as a freelance corporate analyst, but it's a front. Look at this." He pointed to a list of financial transactions. Over the past year, shell corporations linked to Sienna or Katerina had been quietly, strategically short-selling Caldwell Innovations stock. It was a massive, high-risk bet that the company's value was about to plummet. "She wasn't sleeping with you for your money, Ethan." Frank explained the horrifying truth settling in. "She was sleeping with you to get inside your company, to understand its vulnerabilities. The affair itself was the weapon. She knew it would eventually come out. She orchestrated the leak to the press herself. She wanted to create maximum chaos. A public, messy divorce for the CIO, a scandal at the top. It's the perfect catalyst to trigger a stock collapse." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. Her innocent questions about Project Chimera's delays, her curiosity about the board members' personalities, her access to his laptop and phone when he was sleeping or in the shower. She hadn't been a mistress. She had been a corporate spy on a mission of revenge. "If the stock drops by 30 or 40% when this divorce goes public," Frank said, "she'll make a fortune, enough to cripple your company. Maybe even enough to mount a hostile takeover with a consortium of your rivals she's been feeding information to." A cold fury, the likes of which Ethan hadn't felt in years, began to burn through his despair. He had been played, masterfully. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a fool, a mark, in a long con 15 years in the making. He had been so consumed by his own ego, so blinded by her flattery, that he had personally invited the architect of his destruction into his bed. "She's been feeding information," Ethan whispered, his mind racing back through conversations, texts, emails. "To Prometheus." He remembered seeing the contact name on her phone once. He'd assumed it was some silly pet name. Now he knew it was a code name. He looked at Frank, his eyes blazing with a new, desperate fire. "Olivia, does she know any of this?" "I doubt it," Frank said. To Olivia, Sienna is just the other woman, the catalyst for your divorce. She has no idea she's a pawn in a much bigger, more dangerous game. Ethan stood up, his fists clenched. The game had changed. This was no longer just about his marriage. It was about his legacy, his company, and the livelihoods of the thousands of people who worked for him. And it was about the woman he loved, and the son he hadn't yet met, who were unknowingly caught in the crossfire of a war he had started a long, long time ago. "Cancel the signing," Ethan said, his voice hard as steel. "Get me everything you have on Katerina Petrov and every company she's ever been associated with. And get me in a room with Olivia and her lawyer. They think they're divorcing a cheating husband. They need to know they're in business with a saboteur." He was still going to lose his family. He knew that. Some things were broken beyond repair. But he would be damned if he let Katerina Petrov burn everything else to the ground. The reckoning was far from over. The second four-way meeting was even colder than the first. It took place in a neutral conference room, a sterile white box that felt like an interrogation chamber. Olivia and Diana Reyes sat on one side of the table, their faces impassive and unreadable. Ethan and Frank sat opposite them. "If you've brought us here to reject our offer and present a lowball counter, you're wasting our time," Diana began, her voice sharp. "We're not here to talk about the settlement," Ethan said, cutting her off before Frank could speak. He looked directly at Olivia, his gaze steady and stripped of the desperate pleading from their last encounter. "We're here to talk about Sienna Dubois, or more accurately, Katerina Petrov." He saw a flicker of confusion in Olivia's eyes. Diana's expression remained a mask of professional indifference, but her posture stiffened slightly. Ethan laid it all out. He didn't spare himself. He detailed his betrayal of Andrei Petrov 15 years ago, the ruthlessness of his ambition, the callous way he had discarded his partner. He watched Olivia's face as he spoke, saw the flicker of recognition and dawning horror. She knew the story. He had told her a sanitized version years ago, casting himself as the savvy businessman. Now she was hearing the ugly truth. Then he and Frank laid out the evidence they had gathered in the last 24 hours. The name change, the background, the intricate web of shell companies, the massive short positions taken against his stock, the code name Prometheus, who Frank's investigators had tentatively identified as a notorious corporate raider named Victor Korber, a known rival of Caldwell Innovations. "She didn't just sleep with me," Ethan concluded, his voice raw with the shame of his own stupidity. "She played me. She used our affair to gain insider information on Project Chimera's vulnerabilities and to create a public scandal that would tank my company's stock. She's not a home wrecker, she's a corporate assassin. And your divorce petition, Olivia, is the trigger for her attack." The room was silent. Diana Reyes leaned back, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the table, her sharp mind processing the new information. Olivia just stared at Ethan, her expression a complex mixture of shock, disgust, and something he couldn't quite decipher. "This is quite a story, Mr. Caldwell," Diana said, coolly. "A convenient narrative that paints you as a victim instead of an adulterer." "It's the truth," Frank interjected, sliding a copy of their investigator's file across the table. "The financial data doesn't lie. Check the trading records for yourself. The short positions are all there, placed strategically over the last 6 months, timed perfectly to coincide with key project deadlines she would have learned about from Ethan." Diana picked up the file, her eyes scanning the pages with incredible speed. For the first time, Ethan saw her professional mask crack just a little. She was seeing it too. The pattern. The strategy. "Whether this is true or not," Diana said, closing the file, "it doesn't change the facts of my client's case. Mr. Caldwell was unfaithful. He breached the terms of his marriage." "I know," Ethan said, turning his focus back to Olivia. He ignored Diana. He was speaking only to his wife. "I know, and nothing I'm saying is meant to excuse what I did. I betrayed you. I betrayed our marriage and our son. That is a fact, and I will live with it for the rest of my life. The settlement you asked for, you can have it. You can have all of it. But I am asking you not as your husband, but as the father of your child and your business partner, to hold off on filing this publicly, just for a few days." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "If you file now, Katerina wins. She triggers the stock collapse, makes hundreds of millions, and cripples the company that is the primary marital asset of this divorce, the company that is supposed to provide for our son's future. Your settlement will be worth pennies on the dollar, and the legacy we built will be in the hands of our worst enemies." He was offering her a choice between immediate righteous vengeance and a strategic temporary alliance. He was asking her to trust him one last time, not as a husband, but as a CIO protecting their shared interests. Olivia was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. Ethan could see the war raging within her, the desire to punish him, to burn it all down, versus the pragmatic need to protect what was hers, what was her son's. Finally, she looked at Diana. "Is he right? Legally, financially?" Diana Reyes took a deep breath. "The strategy is sound. If his allegations about Petrov are true, a public filing right now would be catastrophic for the company's valuation, and therefore for the value of your marital assets. It would be financially imprudent." The use of the word imprudent was the only concession Diana would make, but it was enough. Olivia turned her gaze back to Ethan. The ice in her eyes had not thawed, but it had been joined by a cold, hard pragmatism he recognized all too well. It was the look of a Beaumont, the old money family that had survived panics and depressions by being smarter and more ruthless than their rivals. "What's your plan?" she asked, her voice clipped and all business. Ethan felt a sliver of hope, not for his marriage, but for their survival. "She thinks I'm a broken, distracted man reeling from a divorce. She's expecting me to be weak. We're going to use that. We're going to feed her bad information. We're going to leak a false rumor about a catastrophic failure in Project Chimera, encourage her and Korba to double down on their short positions. And then at the annual shareholder meeting next week, we're going to unveil the finished, perfected project ahead of schedule. We trigger a massive stock surge, a short squeeze. It will wipe them out. It will bankrupt them." It was a high-risk, high-stakes gambit. It would require perfect execution and absolute secrecy. And it would require Olivia's complicity. "I need you to play your part," Ethan said. "I need the world to believe we are at war, that I am falling apart. The more vicious the divorce looks, the more confident they'll be." Olivia stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a single, sharp nod. "All right, Ethan," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "You have 1 week. You can have your war. But understand this. When it's over and you've saved your company, our divorce proceeds exactly as planned, and I want an extra 10% for my trouble." Diana Reyes allowed herself a small, predatory smile. An unlikely, unholy alliance was formed in that sterile room. A cheating husband and his scorned, pregnant wife united by a common enemy, and the cold, hard logic of mutually assured financial destruction. The week that followed was a masterclass in deception. Publicly, Diana Reyes waged a scorched earth campaign, leaking stories of Ethan's erratic behavior to a hungry press. Privately, Ethan worked with a small, loyal team, perfecting Project Chimera, while feeding a stream of devastatingly false information to Katerina's informant. Believing Ethan was broken and his company was about to implode, Katerina and her backer, Victor Korber, tripled down on their bets against him, leveraging everything they had. At the annual shareholder meeting, the air was thick with bloodlust. Ethan took the stage looking every bit the defeated man the media had portrayed. He spoke of challenges and setbacks, letting the tension build. Then his entire demeanor shifted. "But rumors of our demise," he announced, his voice suddenly booming with authority, "have been greatly exaggerated." The lights dimmed, and he unveiled a flawless, breathtaking demonstration of Project Chimera. It was a triumph, a technological leap years ahead of the competition. The market's reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Caldwell Innovations' stock didn't just climb, it exploded. The short squeeze was catastrophic for his enemies. By the closing bell, Katerina Petrov and Victor Korber were not just wiped out, they were facing financial ruin and a federal investigation. That evening, Ethan didn't go to a victory celebration. He went to Olivia's new apartment. It was elegant, tasteful, and bore no trace of him. She let him in, her face a calm, unreadable mask. "It's done," he said. "They're finished." "I saw," she replied, her voice neutral. "Congratulations, you saved your company." "Our company," he corrected softly. "The papers are being finalized. The extra 10% is yours. You'll be the second largest shareholder." She simply nodded. The silence between them was filled with the ghosts of their shared past. "Olivia," he began, his voice thick with a regret that was bone deep. "I am so sorry. For everything. I was a fool, and I destroyed the only thing that ever truly mattered." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw not anger, but a profound, weary sadness in her eyes. "Yes, you did," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But you also protected our son's future. You showed him what it means to fight. Maybe you can still be a good father." It was not forgiveness. It was not a second chance. It was a path forward, separate but connected by the child they would soon share. He nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in his throat. He had won the war for his company, vanquished his enemies, and secured his legacy. But as he turned and walked out into the lonely city night, Ethan Caldwell, the triumphant billionaire, finally understood with devastating clarity the true feeling of being completely and utterly bankrupt. And so Ethan Caldwell's glittering world was saved, but his home was lost forever. He learned the hardest lesson of all, that the walls of a fortress can just as easily become the walls of a prison. This story is a powerful reminder that trust, once shattered, can rarely be perfectly pieced back together, and the consequences of our choices often have a price tag far higher than we can imagine. It's a story about betrayal, but it's also about an unexpected strength, a wife who refused to be a victim and instead became the silent, strategic architect of her own future. What do you think was Olivia's final decision fair? Could you ever forgive a betrayal of that magnitude, even to save a shared legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story with twists you never see coming, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas just like this. Thank you for listening. What happens when a billionaire's mistress, drunk on power, confronts the wife at a high society gala and says, "You can't stop us"? You expect tears. You expect a scene. You expect a humiliated wife to flee the party. You don't expect the wife to smile. Ellie Vance didn't just smile, she waited. Because Us was her husband, Jaden, and her new star employee, Kira. And stop was the last thing she intended to do. She wasn't just planning to stop them. She was planning to erase them. This is the story of how one woman reminded all of New York who really built the empire. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue wasn't a home, it was a statement. It was 3 floors of polished marble, glass, and air overlooking Central Park. Its walls were adorned not with family photos, but with a rotating collection of masters, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. This was the world Ellie Vance had curated, or at least the world she was credited with curating. To the public, Ellie Vance was the perfect billionaire's wife. She was the elegant, philanthropic shadow to the titan of industry, Jaden Vance, the celebrated CEO of Vance Capital Partners, VCP. Jaden was the face, the charisma. He was the one on the cover of Forbes and Fortune, the Oracle of Manhattan. Ellie, with her quiet grace and preference for the archives at the Frick over the flashbulbs of a gala, was seen as his greatest social asset, a beautiful, intelligent, and utterly passive accessory. This evening was no different. The annual Starlight benefit for the Children's Hospital, an event Ellie herself chaired, was in full swing at the New York Public Library. The room was a sea of customer money and whispered 8-figure deals. Jaden was holding court by the bar, a magnetic force. The market's fearful, he boomed, his voice rich and confident. And when others are fearful, we are greedy. It's that simple. Standing just beside him, basking in his reflected glory, was Kira Thorne. Kira was new, and she was brilliant, and she was, to anyone paying attention, a shark in Chanel. Jaden had discovered her at a competing firm, and, in a move that stunned the industry, hired her as VCP's Chief Strategy Officer, a position created just for her. She was 28, with razor-sharp cheekbones and an ambition that vibrated off her like heat. Ellie watched them from across the room, idly adjusting the clasp on her diamond bracelet. She saw how Kira looked at Jaden, not with admiration, but with a hungry, possessive gleam. And she saw how Jaden, a man who feasted on adoration, was devouring it. "She's a lot," a voice murmured beside her. Ellie turned. It was Arthur Covington, the only other founding partner of VCP. Arthur was old money, old wisdom, and the only person alive who knew the truth. He was the firm's silent conscience and Ellie's mentor. "She's ambitious, Arthur," Ellie said, her voice a low murmur. "Jaden likes ambition. He calls it disruptive energy. He also calls high-risk derivatives a bit of fun," Arthur grunted, sipping his scotch. "This Project Cerberus she's pushing, it's not just disruptive, Ellie. It's reckless. The leverage is astronomical. She's convinced him he's a conquistador." Ellie's gaze sharpened. Project Cerberus, the proposed acquisition of a floundering European tech conglomerate. Kira's pet project. Ellie had read the prospectus. Her assessment was the same as Arthur's. Reckless. "Jaden has always had a blind spot for flattery," Ellie said. "This isn't a blind spot, my dear," Arthur said, his eyes kind but worried. "It's a black hole. Be careful. This one, this Kira, she doesn't just want a seat at the table. She wants the whole table and the chair you're sitting in." Ellie gave him a small, placid smile. "Thank you for the warning, Arthur. I'll be sure to check my chair." She excused herself, gliding through the crowd. She smiled, she complimented dresses, she thanked donors. But her mind was already moving. Later that night, in the sterile silence of the penthouse, Jaden stumbled in, smelling of champagne and Kira's perfume. Fracas. A laughably unsubtle choice. "Incredible night, darling," he slurred, shedding his tuxedo jacket onto a $1 billion sofa. "Kira is a miracle. She's closing the pre-funding for Cerberus. We're going to make billions." "That's wonderful, Jaden," Ellie said, tying the silk belt of her dressing gown. She was in her study, a room he rarely entered. It was lined with books, not art. "I did have a look at the Cerberus file. The debt-to-asset ratio seems concerning. The target company has massive undisclosed pension liabilities." Jaden waved a dismissive hand. "Details." "Ellie, please. You're the best art curator in New York, but leave the financial engineering to us. Frankly, it's a little unattractive when you try to play business." He said it with a patronizing smile, as if letting her in on a charming secret. For 15 years, she had swallowed this. For 15 years, she had played the role of the passive wife. Because, in the beginning, she had loved him. And in the middle, she had built him. But Ellie Vance wasn't an art curator who played at business. Ellie Vance was a quantitative analyst with a PhD in applied mathematics from MIT. Ellie Vance was the one who, 20 years ago, had designed the Orion algorithm, the proprietary trading software that had been the true foundation of VCP's success. Jaden had been the charismatic business major she'd met in college. He was the salesman. She was the architect. She had agreed to stay in the background. She hated the spotlight, and he craved it. It was a perfect partnership, until it wasn't. "You're right, darling," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It must be the details. I'll stick to the paintings." He beamed, kissed her on the forehead, and headed to the bedroom. "That's my girl." The moment she heard the door close, Ellie sat down at her desk. She didn't open a laptop. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a simple, matte black terminal. No branding. No logo. She powered it on. The screen flickered to life with a simple, green text command prompt. She logged in. Her username wasn't Evance. It was Architect. She bypassed the main VCP servers, navigating through the back-end infrastructure she had built. She had ghost access to every file, every email, every keystroke within the VCP network. Jaden, in his arrogance, had forgotten who held the master keys. She started with Project Cerberus. She pulled the real files, not the glossy prospectus Kira had shown the board. Arthur was right. It wasn't just reckless. It was suicidal. The company they were buying was a house of cards, and VCP was about to guarantee its debt. It would cripple them. Why? It didn't make sense. Kira was brilliant. She wouldn't make this mistake. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Ellie's fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled Jaden's corporate expense reports. Dinner at Per Se, $2,000. Cocktails at Bemmelman's, $800. A hotel suite at the Carlyle. Ellie froze. Jaden always stayed at the plaza. He hated the Carlyle. She cross-referenced the date with Kira's calendar. JV strategy meeting. It was a classic, pathetic cliché. But the affair wasn't what made Ellie's blood run cold. She didn't care about the infidelity. That was a dull, predictable human failing. This was something else. She began to dig into Kira Thorne. She found the transfer requests, the consulting fees, the large lump sum payments being wired to an LLC Ellie had never heard of. Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions, LLC, registered in Delaware. Ellie pulled the incorporation documents, the sole signatory, Kira Thorne. And the funding source, a series of wire transfers from a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a holding company that Ellie recognized. It was a parking account for Jaden's personal bonuses. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was paying her. Millions. Why? Ellie kept digging. And then she found it. The other plan. Project Cerberus wasn't designed to make VCP money. It was designed to fail. The plan was simple, brutal, and devastating. Kira and Jaden would use VCP's capital to buy the toxic Cerberus assets. The acquisition would fail catastrophically within 6 months, triggering the debt covenants. VCP would default. The stock would plummet to zero. The board would be wiped out. And then, Kira Thorne, using the millions Jaden had funneled to her and backed by a mystery partner Ellie couldn't yet identify, would step in. She would use Thorne's strategy and acquisitions to buy VCP's entire portfolio, including the Orion algorithm, from the bankruptcy court for pennies on the dollar. It wasn't an acquisition. It was a hostile takeover, a corporate assassination, and Jaden was in on it. He was going to burn his own multi-billion-dollar empire to the ground, just to get rid of his partners, get rid of his board, and Ellie realized, get rid of her. Ellie sat back, the glow of the green screen illuminating her face. She felt no panic, no tears. The betrayal was so absolute, so audacious, that it transcended emotion. It was simply a problem to be solved. They weren't just having an affair. They were trying to steal her life's work. Jaden, the charismatic fool, thought he was building a new life with his brilliant protégé. Kira, the ambitious shark, thought she was outsmarting everyone. Ellie Vance, the architect, looked at the blueprint of their treason, and she began to draw up a new one. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Ellie Vance was the picture of serene domesticity. She finalized the seating chart for a dinner with the French ambassador. She acquired a rare Manet for the new wing of the Met. She sat with Jaden on their terrace, listening to him gush about Kira's vision. "She's just fearless, Ellie," he'd say, swirling a glass of wine. "She reminds me of me in the old days." "She sounds remarkable, darling," Ellie would reply, her eyes never leaving his. "You must be so proud to have mentored her." I am, he'd beam, puffing up with a pride that was both pathetic and suicidal. By night, Ellie was a ghost in the machine. Her command center, her study, became a war room. She slept 2 hours at a time, subsisting on black coffee and a cold, clarifying rage. She wasn't just auditing. She was building a fortress. First, she contacted Brenda Davies. Brenda was known on Wall Street as the Shark, a forensic accountant so ruthless she could find a single fraudulent penny in the Vatican's budget. "Brenda, it's Ellie Vance," she said, on a secure line at 3 a.m. "Mrs. Vance?" Brenda's voice was gravel. "This is a surprise. I thought you only handled the pretty side of the money. I need you to look at an LLC, Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions. I need to know who Kira Thorne's other partners are, the ones who aren't my husband." "That'll be expensive," Brenda said. "Find it," Ellie replied. "And expensive won't be a word you ever need to use again." Second, she called Arthur Covington. "Arthur," she said, meeting him at a secluded bench in Central Park, far from any listening devices. "They're not just being reckless. It's a coup." She laid out the entire plan, the Cerberus acquisition, the planned bankruptcy, the shell company. Arthur's face, usually so composed, turned a deep, furious red. He had given his life to this firm. The gall of that little, and Jaden, that fool. "Arthur, I need you," Ellie said, her voice calm and absolute. "Jaden has the board charmed. They think Kira is a rainmaker. When this blows up, they'll turn on him, yes, but by then it will be too late. The company will be gone. We need to stop the Cerberus deal before it's finalized." "How?" Arthur said. "He's the CEO. He and Kira have already pushed the vote through the executive committee. The board is just a rubber stamp at this point. There is a way, Ellie said, her gaze steady. Do you remember the Patronus clause? Arthur's eyes widened. My God. Ellie, you wouldn't. That's a nuclear option. It was symbolic. It was never symbolic, Arthur, Ellie said. The Patronus clause was a dormant piece of code Ellie had embedded not in the company bylaws, but in the operating system of the Orion algorithm itself. It was a fail-safe she had created 20 years ago, a moral and fiduciary trigger. If the algorithm detected specific patterns of fraud, embezzlement, or gross negligence originating from the CEO's office, patterns she was now actively flagging, it would trigger two things. First, it would place a silent, system-wide freeze on all major capital outlay accounts. Second, it would automatically void the CEO's voting shares and transfer that voting power, temporarily, to the holder of the original seed capital certificate. Jaden Vance thought his father's money had started the firm. The truth, known only to Ellie and Arthur, was that Jaden's father had laughed him out of the room. The real seed money, $10 million, had come from Ellie. It was an inheritance from her grandmother, which she had funneled into the company through a blind trust, with Arthur as the proxy. The Patronus clause gave Ellie Vance, the silent wife, the power to seize control of the entire company with a single keystroke. He's about to sign the final papers for the Cerberus deal, Ellie said. The signing is at the Hamptons Gala, this Saturday. He's planning to announce it as his new legacy. What do you need me to do? Arthur asked, his voice now firm. I need you to be there, and I need you to call an emergency board meeting. Not Saturday. Sunday, 9 a.m., at the main office. No exceptions. He'll never agree to it, Arthur said. He won't have a choice, Ellie replied. The following Saturday was the annual summer soiree at their Bridgehampton estate. It was the event of the Hamptons season. Jaden was in his element, tanned and triumphant. Kira Thorne was at his side, wearing a blinding yellow dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was no longer a protégée. She was a queen holding court, and this was her coronation. Ellie, in a classic, understated navy blue gown, watched them. She had received a text from Brenda Davies an hour before. Got him. The mystery partner. It's not a who, it's a what. A rival fund. Apex Holdings, run by Marcus Blackwood, Jaden's old college rival. Kira cut a deal to sell Apex the algorithm after the bankruptcy. Jaden isn't her partner. He's her mark. She's playing him, too. Full dossier attached. Ellie felt a flicker of something. Not pity. Just a profound disappointment. Jaden wasn't even a good villain. He was just a fool being played by a better shark. At 10 p.m., Jaden and Kira, along with the Cerberus legal team, stepped into the library to sign the final documents. The deal that would ruin VCP and make them, they believed, the new gods of Wall Street. Ellie remained on the lawn, chatting with the senator. Her assistant, Maria, a quiet, fiercely loyal woman whom Kira had bullied relentlessly for weeks, approached her. Madam Vance, Maria whispered. They're in the library. The signing is happening. Thank you, Maria, Ellie said. Would you please ask Arthur Covington to join me on the West Terrace? A moment later, Arthur was by her side. It's time? Ellie nodded. She looked out at the ocean, glittering under the full moon. Jaden always loved fireworks. She took out her phone. It was not her public iPhone. It was the same black, unmarked device from her study. She opened a simple app. A single button glowed on the screen, labeled Execute Patronus. She pressed it. In the library, 5 miles away from the nearest VCP terminal, Jaden Vance put his $10,000 pen to the paper. He signed his name with a flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said, extending a hand. "Call me Jaden." Jaden grinned, grabbing a glass of champagne and handing one to Kira. "To the new VCP." "To us," Kira said, her eyes glittering. Jaden's phone buzzed, and Kira's, and the lawyer's. Simultaneously, at the main VCP office in Manhattan, a dozen red lights began flashing on the compliance servers. Jaden looked at his phone. It was a text from the VCP bank. "Funding transfer for Project Cerberus. Failed. Account frozen. Compliance trigger." "What the hell?" Jaden muttered. Kira's face went white. She was looking at an email. From VCP Legal, Automated. Subject: Emergency compliance hold. All executive accounts. "Jaden," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "What is this? What's going on?" It's a mistake," Jaden stammered, frantically dialing his CFO. "A technical glitch." But the CFO's line went straight to a new, automated message. "All VCP systems are currently under an emergency compliance audit. All executive access is temporarily suspended. This message is by order of the Board of Directors." "The board?" Jaden was shouting now. "I am the board!" His call was interrupted by an incoming one. It was Arthur Covington. "Arthur, what in God's name is going on? My accounts are frozen." "Jaden," Arthur's voice was cold steel. "An emergency meeting of the Board of Directors has been called. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., VCP headquarters. Attendance is mandatory." "I'm not coming. I'm in the Hamptons. You can't—" "Attendance is mandatory, Jaden," Arthur repeated, "or you will be removed in absentia. You and your associate, Miss Thorne." The line went dead. Jaden and Kira stared at each other, the champagne glasses forgotten. The triumph had vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The half-signed papers sat on the mahogany desk, suddenly looking like a death warrant. "What did you do?" Kira hissed at him, her eyes feral. "Did you get sloppy?" "I did nothing," he yelled. It must be Ellie, that bitch." "Ellie?" Kira let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "Your mousy little wife? The one who picks out paintings? What could she do?" The library doors opened. Ellie Vance stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright party lights. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Jaden, darling," she said, her voice light and musical. "Kira, you missed the fireworks. Is everything all right? You both look so pale." The air in the library crackled. Jaden and Kira were frozen, staring at Ellie as if she were an apparition. The lawyers and bankers, sensing a domestic explosion, began quietly gathering their papers and backing toward a side door. "Ellie, what is this?" Jaden tried to regain his footing, puffing his chest out. "You have no right to interrupt this. This is a private signing." "It was," Ellie said, gliding into the room. She placed the 2 champagne flutes on the table, right next to the now voided Cerberus contracts. "But it seems the party's over. Arthur Covington just called an emergency board meeting. Something about— what was the term? Gross financial malfeasance. Sounds so dramatic, doesn't it?" Jaden's face went from pale to purple. You did this! You stuck your nose into my business." "Our business, Jaden?" Ellie corrected him, her voice still infuriatingly calm. She turned her gaze to Kira. "And your business too, Ms. Thorne. Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions, LLC. A very ambitious name, registered in Delaware. Such a proactive move for a new employee." Kira's mask of terror shattered, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. The game was up, and she knew it. The only play left was to attack. She stepped forward, her yellow dress a slash of color in the dark room. She was taller than Ellie, younger, and she used every inch of it, crowding Ellie's space. You think you're clever, don't you? Kira sneered. Going through my private files, you pathetic, jealous relic. You think freezing one account stops anything? I don't know what you're talking about, Ellie said, adopting a look of perfect, wounded innocence. Oh, stop it! Kira shrieked, her voice cracking. Stop pretending to be the fragile little wife. We know you did this. But it doesn't matter. She grabbed Jaden's arm, yanking him to her side. He looked like a bewildered ox. It's over, Ellie, Kira announced, her voice rising, loud enough for the departing lawyers to hear. Do you understand me? It's over. He doesn't love you. He loves me. He's leaving you. We were going to do this quietly, let you keep your paintings and your sad little charities. But you forced our hand. Jaden, caught between two apex predators, finally found his voice, siding with the one he thought held the power. She's right, Ellie, he said, his voice a pathetic attempt at authority. This has been over for a long time. Kira and I, we're together. We are the future of this company. So just stop. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Kira saw Ellie's placid expression and mistook it for weakness. She mistook the calm for surrender. Drunk on her own perceived victory, she moved in for the kill. She leaned in, her face inches from Ellie's. Her voice dropped to a triumphant, venomous whisper. He's mine. The company is mine. You are nothing. And there is not a single thing you can do to stop it. You can't stop us. There it was. The moment. The pivot on which the rest of their lives would turn. Jaden and Kira waited for the explosion. They expected the tears, the screams, the accusations. They expected the satisfying drama of a woman broken. Instead, Ellie Vance held Kira's gaze, and she did the single most terrifying thing she could have done. She smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a bitter smile. It was a small, tight, analytical smile. It was the smile of a mathematician who had just watched her opponent make a fatal, elementary error in their calculations. It was a smile of profound, cold, and absolute certainty. Is that so? Ellie said, her voice no more than a breath. She looked at Kira, then at her husband. She held that smile for 3 long, agonizing seconds. Thank you both for confirming, she said, as if they had just clarified a dinner reservation. Well, I really must get back to my guests. The Prime Minister is waiting. She turned, her navy blue gown rustling. Enjoy the rest of the party, she said over her shoulder. The drive back to the city is dreadful on a Sunday. You should probably leave soon if you want to make the 9 a.m. meeting. She walked out of the library, leaving an Arctic chill in her wake. Jaden and Kira were left standing alone in the silent room. The bravado evaporated, leaving only Kira's hissed, "What was that?" She's bluffing," Jaden said, but he was already sweating through his linen suit. "She's trying to scare us." "That wasn't a bluff," Kira said, her mind, for the first time, racing with genuine fear. "That was something else." "What does she know, Jaden?" "She knows nothing," he roared, panicked. "She's a socialite. She buys art and plans parties. She doesn't know the first thing about the Patronus Clause or the algorithm." "The what?" Kira asked, her head snapping toward him. "The what clause?" Jaden's face went utterly blank with horror. He had just made his second fatal mistake. "Nothing," he stammered. An old piece of code. It's nothing." Kira stared at him. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute, useless idiot. She's been playing you. She's been playing both of us." Kira grabbed her phone and sprinted from the room, frantically dialing Marcus Blackwood at Apex Holdings. "Marcus, we have a problem. A real problem. The wife. I think the wife is architect." The line was silent for a moment. Then Blackwood's cold voice came through. "If Ellie Vance is architect, Ms. Thorne, then you are not in a problem. You are in a liquidation. Do not contact me again." The line went dead. Kira Thorne stood on the immaculate lawn of the Hamptons estate, the party's laughter drifting over her, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be well and truly, and completely, finished. While Kira and Jaden were descending into a spiral of panicked accusations, Ellie Vance was not celebrating. She was working. She had excused herself from the party, claiming a sudden migraine, a plausible lie that earned her sympathetic nods. Her assistant, Maria, drove her not back to the city, but to a small private airfield in West Hampton. A helicopter was waiting. "Maria," Ellie said, climbing in. "Go back to the party. Pack up the guest rooms, all of Mr. Vance's personal belongings. Send them to his new office, the one Kira leased for Thorne Strategies on Water Street. He'll need a change of clothes." "Yes, Madam Vance," Maria said, her face grimly satisfied. "And Maria? You're no longer my assistant." Maria's face fell. "You're my new chief of staff. I'll need you at the office at 7 a.m. A slow, bright dawn of a smile spread across Maria's face. "I'll be there at 6. Ellie was back in her penthouse study by 1:30 a.m. The city was quiet. She was joined as planned by 2 people, Arthur Covington, looking rumpled but resolute, and Brenda the Shark Davies, the forensic accountant, who looked like she had just been mainlining espresso and righteous fury. She was carrying a stack of binders 3 feet thick. "Good evening, Ellie," Brenda said, dropping the binders on the desk with a thud that shook the room. "Or good morning. You, my dear, have been married to the stupidest criminal in New York history." "Jaden isn't a criminal, Brenda," Ellie said, pouring coffee. "He's a narcissist. Kira is the criminal." 6 of 1, Brenda grunted, opening the first binder. "Here's the fun part. Your husband wasn't just sleeping with Ms. Thorne, and he wasn't just paying Ms. Thorne. He was being blackmailed by Ms. Thorne." Ellie paused, the coffee pot in her hand. "What?" "Oh yeah," Brenda said, tapping a document. "Kira didn't just stumble onto this Project Cerberus deal. She's been working with Marcus Blackwood at Apex for 6 months before she ever even met Jaden. She was a Trojan horse. She targeted him, got him into let's call it a very compromising position in a hotel in Geneva. Photos, videos, the whole 9 yards. Ellie closed her eyes. It was even uglier than she'd imagined. "So Kira blackmailed him into hiring her?" Arthur asked, disgusted. "Not at first," Brenda said. "At first it was just a classic honey trap. She had him. Then she pitched him the Cerberus deal. Jaden, darling, we can have it all. We can burn this company, take the algorithm and build our own new empire. We'll be gods." He, being an idiot in love, agreed. He thought it was his idea. "He was co-conspirator," Ellie said, processing. "He was," Brenda agreed, "until about 3 weeks ago, when he got cold feet. He realized that burning the company meant facing the SEC. He tried to back out, and that's when Kira showed him the Geneva photos. She switched from partner to blackmailer. She forced him to go through with the signing tonight. He was trapped. He was going to lose his company, his wife, and his reputation either way. This way, he thought he might at least end up with the girl. And she, Ellie finished, was planning to take the algorithm, feed him to the SEC, and run straight to Marcus Blackwood. A perfect triple cross, Brenda grinned. She's a hell of a player. I almost respect her. So the Patronus clause. It wasn't just for his affair or the financial malfeasance, Arthur said, looking at Ellie. It was for the blackmail, the coercion. The clause was for any threat to the integrity of my algorithm, Ellie said coldly. He became a threat. She is a threat. They are a cancer, and tomorrow we cut them out. It's all here, Ellie, Brenda said, tapping the binders. Wire transfers, the blackmail files, which I recovered from Kira's deleted cloud storage, the contracts with Apex Holdings, the real Cerberus financials, which show she wasn't just buying a failing company, she was personally shorting its stock before she even pitched the deal. A clear case of market manipulation. She's not just facing termination, she's facing 20 years in federal prison. And Jayden? Ellie asked. Jayden is the world's most pathetic victim, Brenda sighed. He's guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, yes. But a good lawyer will paint him as Kira's dupe. He'll be ruined. He'll lose his license. He'll be a pariah. But he'll probably stay out of jail. Ellie was silent for a full minute. She looked at the evidence, the ugly, sordid, pathetic story of her husband's downfall. All right, she said. Her voice was final. Brenda, you've done a masterful job. Have these binders copied. One for every member of the board, one for the SEC, and one for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. With pleasure, Brenda smiled. Arthur, Ellie turned to her mentor. You know the board. General Harrison will be angry about the dishonor. The Duchess will be furious about the risk. They will all be terrified of a scandal. They'll want to bury it, Ellie, Arthur warned. They'll want to fire Kira quietly, let Jayden retire for health reasons. They'll want to protect the firm's name. They'll want you to go back to being the quiet wife, to keep the illusion. I know, Ellie said. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the first grey light of dawn break over the city. They think the firm's name is Vance. They're about to be reminded that the firm's foundation is architect, and the architect is done with illusions. She turned back, her face set. Let's go to work. We have a board meeting to prepare. At 8:45 a.m. on Sunday, the main boardroom on the 50th floor of the VCP building was tense. The full board was present, a rare occurrence. They had been flown in on private jets, summoned by Arthur Covington with a one-line message. The integrity of the firm is at stake. There was General Marcus Harrison, a retired four-star general whose presence lent an air of old-world gravity. There was the Duchess of Ashworth, an early European investor who rarely spoke, but whose opinion held immense weight. There were 3 other senior partners, all looking confused and furious at having their weekends interrupted. They were all murmuring, asking Arthur what was going on. Arthur simply said, "You will see." At 8:55 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Jayden Vance and Kira Thorne stormed in. They had clearly driven through the night. Jayden's linen suit was a road map of wrinkles. Kira had tried to repair her makeup, but her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. They looked less like executives and more like fugitives. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this?" Jayden blustered, trying to take his usual seat at the head of the table. "My accounts are frozen. You've cost us the Cerberus deal. You're going to be hearing from my lawyers." Kira, trying a different tactic, adopted a look of strained professionalism. "Gentlemen, Duchess, I apologize for this internal drama. There has been a misunderstanding, a technical glitch. We can have the Cerberus deal back on track by Monday." "Please, sit down, Ms. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice cutting through her. "Both of you. Over there." He pointed to 2 chairs on the side, away from the main table. The guest chairs. "I will not be," Jayden began. "Sit down." General Harrison's voice was a parade ground command that made Jayden flinch and, instinctively, sit. Kira, seeing she had no choice, sat stiffly beside him. The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked to 9 a.m. The main boardroom doors opened again. Ellie Vance walked in. She was not dressed for a gala or a charity lunch. She was wearing a perfectly tailored dark grey power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She was flanked by Brenda Davies, who was pushing a trolley loaded with binders, and two men in dark suits whom the board did not recognize, the firm's external legal counsel. "Ellie." The Duchess's voice was sharp. "What is this? Has something happened to Jayden?" Jayden shot up. "She's behind this. This is a domestic dispute. She's hysterical. She has no right to be here." "On the contrary, Mr. Vance," the lead lawyer, a man named Peter Finch, said. "She is the only reason you are not already in federal custody." Ellie walked to the head of the table, to Jayden's chair, and remained standing. She did not look at her husband. She addressed the board. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the abrupt summons. My name is Ellie Vance. For 20 years you have known me as Jayden's wife, but today I am here as architect." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The Duchess and General Harrison stared at her. They knew the legend of architect, the anonymous quant genius who had founded the company, but they had all been led to believe it was a partner who had died years ago. "And," Ellie continued, her voice resonating with cold authority, "as of 10:05 p.m. last night, under the Patronus Clause of the VCP Charter, I have assumed temporary, absolute control of this company." That's a lie," Jayden sputtered. "The Patronus Clause is a myth." "It is very real, Mr. Vance," Peter Finch interjected, as his team began placing a thick binder in front of each board member. "It was triggered by a systemic pattern of conspiracy, fraud, and corporate malfeasance, originating from your office and that of Ms. Thorne." Kira Thorne spoke, her voice shaking but defiant. "You have no proof. This is slander. I will sue you. I will sue this entire board." "Proof?" Brenda Davies stepped forward, her voice dripping with scorn. "Page 1, Ms. Thorne. Your employment contract with Apex Holdings, signed 6 months ago. Page 10, the real financials for Cerberus. Page 12, your wire transfers to an offshore account, shorting Cerberus stock. Page 30, the full transcript of your blackmail threats against Mr. Vance, including audio files." Jayden went white. "And for the board," Brenda continued, "page 50, the full detailed plan to bankrupt this company, defraud its shareholders, and sell its primary asset, the Orion algorithm, to a competitor for a fraction of its value. All orchestrated by Miss Thorne, with Mr. Vance as her unwilling and, frankly, idiotic accomplice." The room was utterly silent. The board members stared, stunned, at the files. General Harrison, a man who had seen combat, looked physically ill. "Jayden," the Duchess whispered, her voice horrified. "Is this true?" Jayden couldn't speak. He just stared at Ellie, his expression a mask of disbelief and hatred. Ellie finally turned her gaze to him. It was not the gaze of a wife, it was the gaze of a CEO. "Jayden, for 20 years I gave you my work. I gave you my name. I gave you my trust. And you, in your weakness and your ego, conspired to steal it. You brought a viper into my house." She then turned to Kira, who was trembling, her mask of defiance gone, replaced by the raw terror of a cornered animal. "And you, Ms. Thorne, you saw this firm, this man, this life, and you thought you could just take it. You thought I was a fragile painting on a wall. You mistook my silence for weakness. You mistook my grace for stupidity." Ellie looked back at the board. "The board has 2 options, a quiet retirement for Mr. Vance and a quiet termination for Miss Thorne, which will invite shareholder lawsuits and an SEC investigation that will tear this firm apart. Or we can choose option 2. What is option 2? General Harrison asked, his voice grim. Ellie stood to her full height. Option 2. We excise the cancer. Completely. We restructure. We report this ourselves. We hand Kira Thorne and her conspiracy to the U.S. Attorney on a silver platter. We demonstrate our integrity. And I, she finished, take my rightful place as CEO of this company. A new silence, this one of calculation. The board looked from the damning files to Jaden's pathetic, broken form, to Kira's terrified one, and then to the poised, powerful woman at the head of the table. It wasn't a choice. It was a coronation. A vote, Arthur Covington said, his voice booming. All in favor of accepting the Patronus transition, of terminating Ms. Thorne for cause, and of installing Ellie Vance as the new Chief Executive Officer of Vance Capital Partners, effective immediately. Every hand went up. The vote was done. The shift in power was absolute. Jaden Vance was no longer a CEO. He was just a man in a rumpled suit, sitting in a guest chair. He seemed to shrink. "Ellie, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't do this. Think of our life, our legacy. We built this together. You can't just take it." "I am not taking anything, Jaden," Ellie said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I am reclaiming what was always mine. You were a steward, and you failed." Kira, however, was not done. Seeing her future in flames, prison, lawsuits, utter ruin, she snapped. The terror was replaced by a final, desperate, burning rage. She lunged to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor. You bitch!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the pristine, soundproofed room. "You think this is a victory? You'll be nothing. He made you. Without him, you're just a sad, empty woman in a penthouse. You'll run this company into the ground in 6 months." She jabbed a finger at Jaden. "And you weak, pathetic fool. I gave you a chance to be a king, and you let your wife put a leash on you." "Ms. Thorne," General Harrison said, his voice a low warning. "That is enough. It's not enough." Kira was hysterical now, tears of pure fury streaming down her face. "You can't do this. You can't just erase me. We were—" Ellie watched her. She let the tirade burn itself out. She let the room absorb the full, ugly spectacle of Kira's disintegration. When Kira was finally reduced to heaving, ragged sobs, Ellie walked calmly around the table until she was standing directly in front of them both. She looked at Kira. "You told me, in my own home, that I couldn't stop you." She then looked at her husband. "And you believed her." Ellie Claes Vance spread her hands in front of her. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was not the voice of a wife or a victim. It was the voice of an executioner. "Jaden, you're fired. Kira, you're fired." She nodded to the doors. As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They were not the regular VCP guards. They were from Ellie's own private detail. "Please escort Mr. Vance and Miss Thorne from the premises," Ellie ordered. "They are to take nothing but the clothes they are wearing. Their corporate accounts, their building access, their email. Everything has already been deactivated. They are no longer employees of this firm." "Ellie, no!" Jaden cried out, as a guard took his arm. "You can't. This is my name on the wall." "Your name," Ellie said, "is a liability. Security, please." The guards began to physically move them toward the door. Kira was silent now, her body rigid with shock. Jaden was a babbling, pleading mess. As they reached the elevator bank, the doors to the executive suite opened, and Maria, Ellie's new chief of staff, stepped out. She was holding a single, small, brown cardboard box. She walked past the struggling Kira and stopped in front of Jayden. She held out the box. "Mr. Vance," Maria said, her voice clear and professional. "Your personal effects." Jayden, bewildered, looked inside. The box contained 3 items: a half-dead succulent that Kira had told Maria to throw out weeks ago, a small framed photo of Jayden and Ellie from their wedding, which he had replaced in his office with a magazine cover of himself, and a cheap, ceramic, world's best boss mug his first assistant had given him 20 years ago. It was the ultimate, crushing humiliation. The sum total of his legacy. Jayden stared at the box, and something inside him finally, truly, broke. He stopped fighting. The guards led him into the elevator, a hollow shell of a man. Kira gave Ellie one last look, a look of pure, toxic hatred that promised 1,000 years of revenge. Ellie just met her gaze, unblinking, until the elevator doors slid shut. Ding. They were gone. Ellie turned back to the boardroom. The board was silent, watching her. She walked back to the head of the table. She straightened her suit jacket. She looked at her new board of directors, her face all business. "Ladies and gentlemen," CEO Ellie Vance said, "we have a lot of work to do. Let's talk about the future." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Wall Street Journal headline the next morning screamed, "Vance Capital Shakeup, CEO Jayden. Vance out, wife Ellie Vance in. Architect revealed." The story of the socialite wife, who was secretly the firm's quant genius, was an international sensation. But Ellie Vance had no time for media. She was in cleanup mode. Her first act as CEO was an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the atrium, terrified, expecting mass layoffs. Ellie stood before them, not with the false charisma of Jayden, but with the quiet, intense focus of a surgeon. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Ellie Vance. You knew me as Mrs. Vance. Today I am your CEO. Let's not waste time. Vance Capital Partners was built on 2 things: integrity and intellect. We have, for a short time, been lacking in both." She laid out her plan. "Project Cerberus is dead. All assets related to it are being unwound. Our firm is cooperating fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC regarding the criminal actions of Kira Thorne." A gasp went through the crowd. There will be no retirements. There will be no golden parachutes. We do not reward failure or fraud. Ms. Thorne has been terminated for cause. Mr. Vance has been terminated for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. The shock in the room was palpable. It was a public execution. "But this," Ellie continued, her voice rising, "is not an end. It is a cleansing. Jayden Vance's vision was reckless. Kira Thorne's was criminal. My vision is the one that built this firm. We are returning to the Orion principles. We will be smarter, faster, and more transparent. Anyone who was part of Ms. Thorne's inner circle of sycophants, your keycards will not work this afternoon. Anyone who is here to work, to build, and to win, your real work starts now." She didn't smile. She didn't ask for questions. She just nodded and walked off the stage. The message was clear. The party was over, and the master was home. The financial world, expecting VCP to collapse, watched in awe. Ellie didn't just stabilize the firm, she made it thrive. She cut all the toxic, high-leverage cowboy projects Jayden had loved. She reinvested heavily in the Orion algorithm. She launched a new multi-billion-dollar green energy fund that was both ethical and massively profitable. Within 6 months, VCP's stock was up 30%. And what of Jayden and Kira? Kira Thorne's case was swift. Faced with Brenda Davies' mountain of evidence, the blackmail, the market manipulation, the conspiracy, she had no defense. Marcus Blackwood and Apex Holdings cut a deal and testified against her to save their own skins. She was found guilty on multiple counts, including wire fraud and conspiracy, and sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Jaden Vance was ruined. The divorce was quiet and brutal. Ellie kept everything: the penthouse, the art, the company. Jaden, stripped of his licenses and his reputation, was left with a single, small bank account Ellie had forgotten to freeze, containing just enough for him to rent a small apartment in New Jersey. He became a ghost, a where-are-they-now cautionary tale. The final scene took place 1 year later. Ellie was in her office, the CEO's office. It was redecorated. The heavy mahogany and animal heads Jaden loved were gone. It was now minimalist, clean, and dominated by a single, massive data screen showing global market flows. Her chief of staff, Maria, walked in. "Madam Vance," Maria said. "2 items. First, the U.S. Attorney's Office called. Kira Thorne's final appeal was denied. She's been transferred to the federal prison in Danbury." Ellie nodded, her eyes not leaving the data screen. "Thank you." "Second," Maria continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "Forbes is on line 1. They have finalized their list for the world's most powerful women. You are on the cover. They need to schedule the photo shoot." Ellie finally looked up. She looked past Maria, out the window, at the New York skyline, a city of sharks and kings. She had been a wife, a shadow, and a ghost. Now she was the queen. She didn't smile. She just nodded, all business. "Tell Forbes I can give them 20 minutes on Tuesday. Now patch me through to the Tokyo Fund. I want to talk about our new acquisition." The empire was stable, stronger, and unequivocally, unassailably hers. The empire was hers. The power was hers. The victory was hers. Jaden and Kira learned the hard way. Never, ever underestimate the person who signs the checks and who wrote the code that makes the checks. They thought they were taking over a company. They forgot they were just employees in Ellie's world. What did you think of Ellie's ultimate power move? What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. If you love stories of justice and ultimate revenge, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true-life dramas every single week. Don't miss what's coming next.